"Don't touch that, you're just a maid." The words echoed through the large living room, bouncing off the marble walls like sharp arrows. 9-year-old Anaya froze, her small hand hovering just inches above the edge of a colorful storybook lying on the velvet sofa. Her heart pounded, and she quickly pulled her hand back as if the book had burned her. The boy who had yelled at her was only a little older, the son of the rich family whose house she cleaned every single day. He looked at her with disgust, like she had dared to breathe air that didn't belong to her. "Books aren't for people like you," he snapped again before walking away, his voice full of something she didn't yet understand. Privilege. Anaya stood there for a few seconds, silently watching the boy disappear down the hallway. She looked down at her cracked hands, the result of scrubbing floors with harsh soap for hours. Her fingers were stiff, the tiny joints red and sore. Her knees always ached from kneeling for so long on cold, hard tiles. Her back hurt. Her stomach was often empty. But in that moment, it wasn't the pain in her body that hurt. It was the pain in her heart. She had always been curious. Every time she saw a book, she wondered what was inside. What kind of worlds were hidden between the pages? What stories? What knowledge? What magic? The book on the sofa had a shiny red cover and gold letters. She didn't know how to read them, but they looked beautiful. She had just wanted to hold it for a moment. She had only wanted to know. And for that, she was shouted at, as if she had committed a crime. But Anaya didn't cry. No, crying was for moments when there was no hope left. And she still had a little flame of hope burning quietly inside her. She picked up the book very gently, almost like it was a bird with fragile wings. She looked at it one last time and carefully placed it back on the cushion. Then she whispered to herself, "One day I'll own a library, and no one will stop me from touching any book." She didn't know how or when, but she believed it. That belief became a seed inside her heart. That small whispered promise would become the thing that gave her strength, day after day, as she scrubbed floors, washed dishes, cleaned toilets, and watched the world treat her like she didn't belong. After finishing her chores that day, Anaya returned to her tiny room at the back of the house. It wasn't even really a room, more like a storage closet with a thin mattress on the floor. There was one small window, and the moonlight came through it like a silent friend. She sat near the window and closed her eyes. She imagined a place filled with books, tall shelves, ladders, warm lights, and cozy chairs. She imagined children walking in and picking any book they wanted. She imagined herself there, not as a maid, but as someone respected, someone important, a librarian, a teacher, maybe even more. She didn't know the words for what she wanted to be yet, but she knew she didn't want to be invisible anymore. She didn't want to be just a maid for the rest of her life. That night, she made another promise. No matter how hard it got, she would never stop learning. Even if she had to teach herself, even if she had to read words in the dust she wiped off the furniture, even if no one helped her, especially if no one helped her. That was the night everything changed. Not outside, but inside her. A storm had been born in her chest, quiet but powerful. A storm that would carry her across years of struggle. A storm made of dreams, courage, and pain. And that storm had only just begun. Anaya's life was a quiet battle. From the moment the sun rose until it dipped behind the hills, she worked like a shadow, unseen, unheard, and forgotten. At just 10 years old, she moved like an adult in a child's body, sweeping floors, scrubbing pots, folding laundry, and running from one room to another on call. She never complained. She never rested. But her eyes, those tired, determined eyes, were always searching for something more. While the other children of the house laughed, played, and went to school, Anaya carried trays and picked up after them. One afternoon, while taking out the garbage, she saw something that changed everything. Sticking out of a torn bag was an old school book, its pages stained, corners curled, and cover half missing. But to Anaya, it looked like treasure. She glanced around, picked it up, and tucked it into her worn apron before anyone could see. That night, after everyone in the house had gone to bed and the lights were off, she crept into the tiny storeroom where she slept. She sat quietly under her thin blanket, using a small torch she had secretly taken from the shed. She opened the book slowly, carefully, and stared at the strange lines and shapes inside. Letters, words, sentences. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from excitement. She didn't know how to read, but she wanted to. She needed to. That night, she traced the letters with her fingers, whispering each one, guessing their sounds, imitating what she had overheard the other kids say. She repeated the same page again and again, until her eyelids dropped and the torchlight faded. This became her secret world. Each night, after hours of back-breaking work, she opened that book and studied it like it was magic. Slowly, she learned the alphabet, then tiny words, then sentences. It took weeks, then months. She had no teacher, no guide, no pen or notebook, just one broken book, a small torch, and a burning desire. Every letter she learned felt like freedom. Every sentence she understood felt like a key unlocking a prison door. Her world was changing silently in the dark, but fate had its own way of noticing hidden sparks. One night, as she sat whispering the words under her blanket, a creaking sound interrupted her. She looked up, heart pounding. Standing at the door was the old grandmother of the house. Her white hair fell over her shoulders, and she held a glass of water in her hand. The torchlight had escaped through a gap in the blanket, catching her attention. Anaya froze, expecting a scolding, or worse, punishment. The old woman walked in, slowly, her eyes fixed on the book. She sat down beside Anaya on the rough floor and asked gently, "What are you doing?" Anaya's hands shook as she tried to hide the book, but the grandmother reached out and touched her shoulder softly. "It's all right," she said. "Tell me what you're reading." Anaya looked down and whispered, I'm trying to learn." There was silence. Then the grandmother did something unexpected. She smiled. "Then read to me," she said, leaning back against the wall. That night changed everything. The old woman listened patiently as Anaya read a few broken sentences, mispronouncing most of them. When she finished, the grandmother said, "Every night, 10 minutes, I'll teach you." From then on, their secret classes began. The old woman would bring her own torch, sit beside Anaya after everyone had gone to sleep, and help her read a new page. She taught her how to sound out letters, how to form words, how to understand meanings. Just 10 minutes a night, nothing more. But to Anaya, those 10 minutes were gold. They became the highlight of her life. The grandmother never told anyone, neither did Anaya. It was their secret, their bond, and their shared rebellion against a world that had labeled Anaya as just a maid. Days remained the same, hard, exhausting, and silent. But nights became hopeful, magical, and full of light. Anaya was still cleaning floors and washing dishes. Anaya was 14 now, and something inside her had changed. She had become stronger, more aware of the world around her, and more tired of being treated like she didn't matter. That morning she was on her knees scrubbing the stairs, her hands burning from the cleaning liquid, when one of the houseboys, and around her age, came down with a teacup in his hand. With a wicked grin, he pretended to trip and spilled the hot tea straight on her head. Everyone around laughed. Even the adults turned their faces away, pretending they saw nothing. The heat of the tea wasn't as painful as the fire burning in her heart. That night, something in her broke. Or maybe, something in her woke up. She sat on the cold floor of the kitchen where she slept, hugging her knees, and silently decided, "I can't stay here anymore." So, with trembling hands and a heart full of fear, she packed the only 2 sets of clothes she owned into a plastic bag. She left behind everything else, including the half-torn books hidden in her blanket and the old woman who had once taught her to read. She stepped out into the night with nothing in her pocket and no idea where she was going. But she kept walking. She slept on bus stops, under bridges, in temple yards, wherever she could find a corner. For food, she begged quietly, sometimes just a piece of roti from a roadside vendor. But she didn't give up. After some days, she found work at a small tea stall. It wasn't much. She cleaned tables and washed cups for 50 rupees a day. But she saved every coin. She would sleep for just 4 hours and spend the rest of her time looking for schools, asking people questions, reading signboards, staring at textbooks at roadside stalls she couldn't afford to buy. She was often turned away. "You're too old," they said. "Where's your certificate? You don't belong here." But one day she found a small government school that allowed late admissions. It was a miracle. The principal, a tired but kind woman, looked into Anaya's eyes and saw something different. She said, "You can try, but it won't be easy." Anaya nodded. She was ready for hard. She'd been living hard since she was born. So she began her new life, working at the tea stall in the mornings, attending school in the afternoons, and studying under a streetlight at night. Her fingers often smelled of dish soap, and her clothes were old, but her notebook was always clean. She failed in her first term exams. She cried that night, silently, her head buried in her arms. But she didn't stop. She tried again, and failed again. People laughed. "She's just a maid. What does she think she'll become?" But she kept going. Her tea stall owner, an old man who barely spoke, started leaving an extra boiled egg for her every morning. For strength, he'd say. One of the bus conductors gave her an old English grammar book. Small kindnesses. That meant the world. And then came the third exam, her final chance. She studied like never before. She wrote every answer like it was her last. And when the results came, she had not only passed, she had topped the entire district. Her name was on newspapers. People came to the tea stall and asked, "Is that girl really working here?" She smiled shyly and served them chai. But inside she knew, this is just the beginning. Years flowed like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes wild. But Anaya kept swimming. After topping her district in high school, doors that once seemed sealed shut began to creak open. With her exceptional scores and an inspiring backstory, she secured a scholarship to a reputable college in the city, a place she had once only seen in her dreams. She chose business administration as her major, determined to learn not just how companies worked, but how leaders were made. In her tiny hostel room, she stayed up late watching YouTube videos to learn English, mimicking every sentence 10 times until her tongue stopped tripping over the words. She'd record herself, play it back, correct herself, and try again. Her accent wasn't perfect, but her confidence was bulletproof. She read every free PDF she could find on business strategy, digital marketing, and leadership. She couldn't afford the expensive courses others took, so she built her education piece by piece, scavenging knowledge like she once scavenged torn books from garbage bins. But the road wasn't smooth. In college, her past clung to her like an unwanted shadow. Some students mocked her old clothes, others whispered about her maid background. A few professors doubted her abilities when she stuttered while giving her first presentation. But Anaya had long learned not to cry in front of people who doubted her. Instead, she turned every moment of judgment into fuel. Every insult reminded her of the tea that had once been poured on her head. The sting, the humiliation, and the fire it lit in her soul. Every laugh at her accent echoed the sound of a book being snatched from her hands, a sound that still haunted her, but also drove her to never let another girl feel that way again. By the time she graduated, Anaya had a dream that wasn't just about her own success. It was about lifting others. At 24, with nothing but a borrowed laptop and a single table in a shared co-working space, she launched her own startup. No investors, no rich friends, just a simple website and a big vision to help girls from backgrounds like hers learn digital skills and earn from home. She called it Udaan, meaning flight. The first few months were brutal. She taught the first batch of students herself. Design, data entry, freelancing, basic computer literacy. She handled marketing, accounts, training, and tech support, all at once. When the electricity went out, she taught using a whiteboard and battery-powered lamps. When internet was down, she carried USBs of materials to students' homes on foot. She paid salaries late sometimes, but never missed paying even one. Slowly, word spread. Girls who had never stepped out of their homes were now earning dollars online. Single mothers were able to provide for their children. Domestic workers were finding confidence behind computer screens. Udaan wasn't just a company. It was a movement. Within 5 years, the company had grown to a team of 50 employees. Every single one of them a woman from an underprivileged background. They worked with clients from across the globe, managing virtual assistant tasks, content writing, editing, and graphic design. But the biggest victory wasn't financial, it was personal. The same society that once dismissed Anaya now began to honor her. She was invited to speak at colleges and universities. She featured in local newspapers and international digital magazines. NGOs asked her to collaborate. A multinational offered to acquire her startup. She refused. It wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. She didn't want her mission diluted or turned into a corporate campaign. Today, Anaya Khan walks into conference halls wearing clothes of her choice, with a voice that shakes the room and a smile that hides decades of silent suffering. When asked what keeps her going, she says, "I remember who I was, and I fight for every girl who's still stuck there." Years later, when Anaya had become a name everyone admired, she received an invitation that brought her emotions to the surface. It was for a prestigious award ceremony being held in one of the most luxurious five-star hotels in the city. The kind of place where she once stood outside barefoot, carrying shopping bags for others. But this time she was going in through the front door, not as a maid, but as a chief guest. As she stepped out of her car, wearing a royal blue silk sari, delicate gold earrings, and heels that clicked with confidence, camera flashes exploded around her. She carried not just her elegance, but her journey. One filled with fire, pain, and unstoppable determination. Inside the grand ballroom, chandeliers sparkled like stars, and as her name was announced, the entire hall stood up and clapped. CEOs, ministers, celebrities, all rose to honor a girl who once had nothing. Anaya smiled politely, walked to the stage with her usual poise, and accepted her award. Not for wealth, but for impact. Her speech was simple. "Every time I was told you can't, I chose to say, 'Watch me.'" This award belongs to every girl still dreaming in silence. After the ceremony, people lined up to take selfies, ask questions, and offer congratulations. But Anaya's eyes caught something. Someone. Standing at the back of the hall. A frail, older woman in a dusty brown shawl, her hands trembling, eyes filled with tears. She looked so out of place in this fancy world. And yet, to Anaya, she looked like home. For a moment, time stopped. Anaya whispered, "Nani?" The woman nodded slowly. It was her grandmother, the same woman who once whispered alphabets into her ears when no one was watching. The same Nani who had risked being scolded just so little Anaya could read a single page. Wrinkled and weak now, but her eyes were still warm. Anaya rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, and hugged her tightly like a little girl who had just found her way home after years of storm. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. That hug was a full conversation, a lifetime in a moment. Guests stood frozen, watching something far more powerful than any award, a reunion of souls stitched together by love, loss, and hope. Later that night, Anaya sat quietly in her apartment, holding the award in one hand and an old faded picture of her and her Nani in the other. The next morning, she made an announcement that would melt hearts across the nation. She launched a scholarship program, not for toppers, not for rich kids, but for underprivileged girls who had big dreams, but no one to believe in them. She named it Nani's Light. "It was my grandmother's kindness that lit my fire," she told the press. "Now I want to pass on that light to 100 girls every year." The program was a gift to forgotten daughters. It offered free training in coding, digital marketing, graphic design, business skills, and English. But more than that, it offered belief. Each girl got a laptop, internet access, and a monthly stipend, so they could study without worrying about food. In just a few months, the results were magical. Girls from slums were building websites, daughters of laborers were freelancing for global clients. One girl even launched her own jewelry business on Instagram, and credited Nani's Light for everything. Anaya personally met every batch. She sat on the floor with them, laughed with them, taught them how to speak with confidence. To every girl, she told the same thing: don't wait for someone to save you, be the hero you're waiting for. And in every corner of that learning center, a photo of her grandmother hung on the wall, framed under golden light, with the words, "Because of her, they shine." The same girl who once couldn't afford a pencil was now writing the future of hundreds. And that's how Anaya's story came full circle, not with revenge, not with riches, but with a heart big enough to lift others. Anaya's journey proves that even the darkest paths can lead to the brightest destinations. If her story touched your heart, imagine how many lives we can inspire together. Like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Every week we bring you real emotions, deep messages, and a reminder. You are stronger than you think. Subscribe now, and let's grow, dream, and rise together.